To honor his mistress, Julian asked me for a divorce. I demanded that he leave with nothing, but he refused. In the end, I made a bet with him, valid for 1 year. A year later, he shouted in frustration, "You didn't keep your end of the bet." I smiled at him. "Wasn't it you who didn't keep the bet?" Some people spend 40 years without learning love or responsibility. Some will ultimately pay the price for their greed and hypocrisy. We've known each other for 40 years, and after 20 years of marriage, my husband cheated on me. After a month of Cold War, Julian came home. He sat across from the tea table, looking at me with an indifferent expression. "Rachel, I believe you've had time to cool down over this period. We're both over 40 now, able to think rationally about things. Since you've already found out, I have nothing left to hide. I've been with Wendy for a year now, and throughout this year, I've kept it hidden to spare your feelings. I know what we're doing is wrong, so this past year has been incredibly difficult for me, always carrying the burden of guilt. I don't want to go on like this. I can't do this to you and our son, and then also betray Wendy. So, let's get a divorce. I'll give all the cash and properties to you and our son, keeping only my company shares. For the sake of our decades of friendship, let's part amicably." I thought he came back to explain things to me. I thought he came back to save our marriage. I thought he came back to beg for my forgiveness. But it never crossed my mind that he was back to get a divorce. I rotated the wedding ring I had worn for over 20 years. The silver band had long since lost its former luster. Instead, it bore numerous scratches, a testament to the passage of time. She took off the ring and tossed it to Julian. "Here's your stuff back." Julian didn't know what Rachel had thrown to him at first, only realizing after he caught it, it was an old silver ring. He remembered this ring, he had given it to Rachel when he proposed. He never expected her to still have it. For some reason, I felt a twinge of guilt in my heart. But thinking of Wendy, that flicker of guilt quickly vanished. "I bought you so many beautiful diamond rings. Why keep this old thing?" Julian casually tossed the ring into the trash bin on the tea table. Such a worthless thing should have never existed in his family in the first place. It constantly reminds him of how impoverished he was at that time. It constantly reminds him of how wretched he was at that time. I watched him throw the ring I had worn for over 20 years into the trash can. I laugh at my own foolishness, laugh at my own stupidity, laugh at myself for still holding expectations of him. I laugh at myself, wondering why I still struggle and cling to these memories. A worthless silver ring trapped me for 20 years. Now that it's gone, I truly should let go. That boy who promised to love me for a lifetime, to stay with me forever, has grown blurry in my memory. People change, don't they? Childhood sweethearts or not, over 20 years of marriage or not. None of it compares to his little darling. The sudden awakening even makes me somewhat grateful that I'm only 42, having lived just half my life. At this point, letting me see a man's true nature in time, I still have the capital to cut my losses before it's too late. Yet, for no reason at all, an indescribable anger rose within my heart. We will divorce, but he's not calling the shots on the terms. All these years as a wealthy lady, I've worked on cultivating my character. But silently enduring harm, that isn't who I am. Julian, I've stood by you from nothing, shared every hardship imaginable with you, just to build this family fortune. But now you want to take the money I've worked so hard to earn and marry another woman. Let me make it clear to you, I won't let any other woman pluck the fruits of my lifelong toil. Whoever dares to, I won't mind cutting off their claws. If you want to fly off together with your little sweetheart, then you'll leave here with nothing but yourself." Julian sighed, as if he had guessed I would react like this. "Rachel, it's my fault, I understand that you're angry. But if the love is gone, it's just gone. Wendy is still young, I can't leave her with nothing. We've known each other for 40 years, married for 20, and shared so many happy memories together. For the sake of the decades we've shared, please grant me this. Let's part on good terms. Don't say such hurtful things anymore, it truly damages our relationship. Even if we divorce, I'll still consider you family. He says he no longer loves me, wants to leave assets for Wendy, talks about how happy we once were, and speaks of parting amicably and not hurting our feelings. He says that after the divorce, I'll still be his family. How noble and sentimental. That familiar face now looks utterly detestable. You really have the audacity, Julian. The young and charming second wife and the ex-wife who stood by you through decades, becoming one happy family. You really are a riot, I said, and I actually laughed. I think I'm the first person to laugh after being betrayed. Under his embarrassed gaze, I laughed until I had my fill, then finally stopped. I wiped away the tears that my laughter had brought to my eyes. You can divorce, but you must leave with nothing, or there's nothing to talk about. I was too resolute, not accepting his show of weakness in the slightest. Julian impatiently rotated the teacup in his hand, speaking coldly. Rachel, I've always believed that even if we can't be husband and wife, we can still be family and friends. We grew up together, have known each other for 40 years. With 40 years of friendship, must you be so ruthless? Ruthless? I don't think so. I spent 20 years enduring hardships with him, helping him start his business. Finally, when we succeeded and could enjoy life to the fullest, he wanted to fly away with another woman. Letting another woman enjoy the good life that he and I built together, reaping rewards without any effort. I am not happy, so why should he be allowed to live a perfect life? I remained silent, silence was my stance. Julian suddenly slammed the teacup heavily onto the tea table. With a crisp sound, the blue and white porcelain teacup shattered into several pieces. Just like our crumbling marriage now. Rachel, after all these years, I never realized how greedy you could be. The family assets are half mine, and I've already given you most of my share. How can you still be so unsatisfied? Why can't we part on good terms? Do you really have to force us to tear everything apart? I looked at his angry expression and pulled the corner of my mouth into a sarcastic smile. It was clearly him who betrayed, made me unhappy, and made me unwilling. Kindness was exploited, trust was toyed with, emotions were deceived, sincerity was mocked. How dare he still think of parting ways amicably? My mind is made up. In the divorce, you can only take yourself. Otherwise, I won't let you off easy. Julian had rarely spoken to anyone with such groveling humility in all these years as CEO. Rachel had repeatedly provoked him, and his patience had reached its limit. Rachel, my guilt is limited. Yes, I know you've endured hardships and sufferings with me, but half of the entire family fortune belongs to me. You can't possibly swallow it all. Since we can't reach an agreement, we'll follow legal procedures. By then, you might not be able to get so much of the assets. I still hope you'll think it over carefully. I poured myself a cup of tea and took a sip, it was a bit bitter. I looked up at him and sneered, oh, so now we're not talking about decades of emotional ties anymore? Julian, you can consult a lawyer and ask if the court will grant the divorce without my consent. A divorce lawsuit could drag on for decades, until we're both 6 feet under. Then your little sweetheart would cry her heart out, still being the mistress even in death. Julian was somewhat annoyed. Why couldn't she understand? Since that was the case, she couldn't blame him for what was to come. If you don't agree, then we won't get divorced. I'm moving out today. After 2 years of separation, I'll file for divorce again, and I'll still end the marriage then. I can give her a proper status too. And don't even think about getting so much of the property anymore. With that, he picked up his suitcase and went to the bedroom. 10 minutes later, he walked out carrying a heavy suitcase. Without giving me a glance, he went straight toward the door. After betraying me, he still wants to control me. Let's see how that goes. I spoke leisurely. In today's society, some people are quite tolerant. There might even be more people supporting her as the other woman, don't you think? Julian's foot, which was already at the doorway, stopped. He turned around and glared at me fiercely. What do you want? I slowly took another sip of tea. Bitter, yet with a lingering sweetness. What's the harm? Netizens are quite open-minded. Who knows, they might even start shipping you too, seeing such a perfect match. Before I could finish, I heard Julian shout angrily, "You dare?" His fingers gripping the suitcase were white-knuckled, and a vein throbbed on his forehead. He had lost his earlier composure, replaced now with a look of tension. I never expected him to care about women to such an extent. Seeing him like this, I couldn't help but laugh instead. On the negotiation table, the worst thing is to let others grasp your weakness. I dare, I dare everything. I am dignified, I am generous, I am humble and reasonable. But I also hold grudges, Julian knows that. During those years of entrepreneurship, Julian and I often dined with clients. Because I was young and beautiful, I naturally received inexplicable harassment during these dinners. At the time, I would endure it quietly, pulling Julian along with me. But after Julian and I achieved entrepreneurial success, those who once harassed me, either they ended up with broken families and scattered lives, or were embroiled in scandals, and some even went bankrupt. Julian knew it was my doing and even helped me clean up the mess. That's why he understood, I was capable of it. I think this might be why he was willing to humble himself and come to personally discuss the divorce. I think he was afraid that I would treat him and his little darling with the same ruthless methods I used on those others. Yet, it also exposed his weakness. Julian said nothing, just looked at me with a cold gaze. I didn't take it to heart, instead, I looked at him provocatively. If you insist on taking away the equity, the company might go bankrupt. You know I have the ability to make that happen. Also, I will sue you and your little darling to recover the marital property. If I'm in a better mood, I might even try to sue you for bigamy, who knows, it might just work. Before I could finish, Julian had already rushed up to me, glaring at me from across the tea table, filled with anger. I ignored him and continued sipping my tea. The taste was getting better and better. Julian knew that Rachel really had the means to do it, and this was precisely what made him hesitant to act. He backed down, softening his tone. Rachel, we grew up together as childhood sweethearts, with feelings since we were young. It's been over 40 years since we met. Search your conscience and ask yourself, have I not treated you well? Even if I no longer love you now, I still see you as family. Can't you just let me go? That's a company we built together from the ground up. Can you really bear to see it destroyed? He spoke with such heartfelt sincerity, but I could only hear it as a joke. To get a divorce and give his mistress a proper status, he tried every trick in the book. Julian, don't deceive yourself. What kind of affection do you think remains between us? Of course I'm willing. You know I'm someone who settles every score. I wouldn't leave money for those who have hurt me to spend. Julian trembled all over, clearly reaching the peak of anger. Rachel, I never expected you to be such a madwoman. He slammed the door and left, disappearing for yet another month. In this past month, I did only one thing, I found a lawyer and sued him and his sweetheart. No one can wrong me and walk away unscathed. He has come back. It must be true love indeed. Rachel, you actually had the audacity to report me and Wendy. Seeing his angry face gave me a great sense of satisfaction. What, are all your assets frozen now? You've received the court summons, so tell your sweetheart to get her finances in order. Otherwise, if she can't come up with the money when the time comes, she'll become a deadbeat. And by the way, since we're not divorced yet, I suggest you stop giving her money. Lately, I've received quite a few photos from concerned citizens. There seems to be enough evidence to sue you for bigamy. But don't worry, for the sake of our many years together, I don't plan on doing that just yet. However, there's no affection between me and Wendy. I'll sue her at any time to reclaim my assets. And one more thing, stop playing tricks at the company. Forget about this month. But if I find out again, I won't mind calling a board meeting and exposing your true colors. The board might consider replacing the CEO. Julian felt a chill run down his spine, overcome by an unexpected sense of dread. He hadn't realized that Rachel was aware of his every move. Recalling how he'd often felt watched lately, he knew Rachel had him monitored. He had been living under her surveillance all this time. Having known each other for decades, he was aware of Rachel's methods. All those who had bullied her back in the day had been dealt with by her own hands. At the time, he thought it was just like his wife, but now he only found it utterly terrifying. He proposed a divorce and decided to give Rachel the majority of their assets precisely because he knew her methods and feared she might go crazy. He wanted a clean and peaceful separation, but to his surprise, the negotiations fell apart. He also knew he was wronging Rachel. He had genuinely loved Rachel before. But after all these years, his feelings had long since faded. He knew how formidable Rachel could be. At first, he hadn't planned on getting a divorce, only wanted to keep Wendy on the side. But he never expected to get caught. Seeing Wendy not dare to fight back when Rachel hit her that day, he suddenly felt sorry for Wendy. He wanted to give her a rightful place. He didn't want her to remain the other woman. He didn't want her to be slapped again. Divorce was something he had thought through carefully. He firmly believed that having grown up together since childhood, even if they divorced, Rachel wouldn't completely disregard the decades of affection they shared. But he was wrong. Rachel truly showed no consideration for their past relationship. He should have known that with Rachel's vindictive personality, she wouldn't let him off easily. Thinking about Rachel making a scene, thinking about the possibility of his own reputation being destroyed. Thinking about his son. Thinking about his parents at home. He felt a profound sense of helplessness. Why is it so difficult to be with someone you love? He took a deep breath and finally made a decision. As long as Rachel stops causing trouble and allows him and Wendy to live peacefully, he would accept it. After all, even without the shares, he's still the president, with an annual salary in the millions, plenty for him and Wendy to live on. Rachel, I've said it before, you are my family, so I will do this for you. If you withdraw the lawsuit, I'll leave with nothing. Looking at him, pleading for mercy and dejected, my heart was filled with confusion. Suddenly, I remembered the young man who had shielded me tightly in his arms during the car accident. He was covered in blood, panicked as he stroked my face, his voice faltering. Rachel, SSS. I'm not in pain. Don't cry, seeing you cry breaks my heart. Don't worry. I won't die, I promise, let's make a bet. He vomited a mouthful of blood, crimson and glaring. I bet I won't die. The wager is, if I don't die, you marry me. If I die, you leave. The face of the young man in my memory gradually overlaps with Julian before me. Rachel, for the sake of the bond we shared growing up together, please stop making a fuss, all right? Hearing his voice, I snapped back to reality and gazed at him with sorrow. Julian, let's make a bet. Julian was taken aback. He hadn't expected Rachel to want to make a bet with him at this moment. This reminded him of the days he spent with Rachel. His heart was slightly moved, but thinking of Wendy, he quickly suppressed those complicated thoughts. How are we betting? Tell me. I looked at him earnestly, and he looked at me just as earnestly. It reminded me so much of the serious expressions we used to have when we made bets. I bet she doesn't truly love you, she's just after your money. As I finished speaking, Julian's expression changed. She's not that kind of woman. I could see he was somewhat annoyed, as if I had tarnished their pure love, but I went on anyway. I bet she'll leave you for someone else once you run out of money. Impossible. I'll take that bet. Unless you're scared. Of course I'm not scared. Wendy isn't that shallow. Okay, then let's bet. I'll reclaim the marital property, and you leave with nothing, not taking a single share. If your little sweetheart, in your times of hardship, still sticks with you and stays by your side for a whole year, you win. If you win, I'll return the company shares to you, and you'll also get half of the other household assets. At that point, you can give it all to your little sweetheart, and I won't object. And I will also persuade our son to accept Wendy and bless the two of you. I will also persuade my parents not to be angry with you. Julian looked at Rachel in shock, his mind a whirl of confusion. Just now, she had been aggressive, strikingly reminiscent of how she had challenged him to a bet in the past. He had no intention of betting at all, but for some reason, in that very moment, he found himself nodding involuntarily. "Fine, I'll take the bet." Watching him agree with such certainty, I felt a brief sense of confusion. Countless images overlapped. The youthful version of him, the adolescent version, the post-graduation version, each one had been this resolute. "Aren't you going to ask what the cost will be if you lose?" "I won't lose." Julian was confident, believing in his own judgment. "If I lose, I'll agree to any condition you set. But we must sign an additional agreement." Confident in his victory, he wanted security to prevent Rachel from going back on her word. I shook my head. "Julian, we've been betting for decades, when have we ever signed an agreement?" Julian was a bit annoyed. "Then how do I know you won't deceive me?" I looked at him calmly. "Julian, you were the one begging for a divorce. I'm only proposing this bet out of consideration for the decades of feelings we've shared. Whether you take the bet or not, it doesn't matter to me. You should know my gambling character. When have I ever gone back on my word?" My gambling character is something Julian is well aware of. He and I grew up together, and he is only a few months older than me. At the age of 5, Julian and I made our first bet, with the stake being the lollipop in my hand. I fought back tears as I handed the lollipop to him. When I was 6, I took the initiative to bet with Julian. The stake was the toy pistol his father had brought back from a business trip. I can still vividly recall the sight of his reddened eyes and reluctant expression as he handed the pistol to me. I faintly remember. At the age of 7, when I started elementary school, Julian bet with me again. I lost and ended up doing his homework for an entire year. When I was 8 years old, he lost and did my homework for a year. When I was 9, he lost and brought me breakfast for a year. When I was 10, I lost, so I started doing his homework again and had to cover for him when he secretly played video games. When I was 11, he lost, and I got his favorite video game console. Until the 3rd year of high school, at 17, Julian said he would definitely get into the same university as me, but I didn't believe it. He made a bet with me. If he got into the same university as me, I would have to be his girlfriend, not just his little sister. If he lost, he said he would give me all the money he earned for the rest of his life. Julian was at the bottom of the class in our high school, while I was the top student in our grade, with hopes of getting into a top university. A sure win bet, why not take it? He began burning the midnight oil, writing diligently every day. And I was no less hardworking, putting in even more effort. I would explain problems to him, and sometimes, when he couldn't grasp it, I would scold him, calling him a blockhead. Each time he would grin foolishly and say that as a blockhead, I could surely carve something out of him. During the college entrance exams, I underperformed, while Julian exceeded expectations, and our scores ended up being very close. He shamelessly applied to the same university as me. I also became his girlfriend. At that time, he was so happy that he picked me up and spun me around, laughing brightly. I was happy too. What if I couldn't get into the best university? Being with the person I loved was what mattered most. I never told him that I could have actually gotten in, so I deliberately controlled my score during the exam. The last time we made a bet was during that car accident, when he held me tightly in his arms. He suffered severe injuries, while I only had a minor concussion. He spent a month in the ICU, using up all of our savings. I lost the bet, so I became his wife. I accompanied him through starting his business and enduring hardships, and I cherished every moment of it. Watching him achieve career success and gain fame, I couldn't contain the joy in my heart. Yet now, all of this seems to have turned into dreams and illusions. From the age of 5 to 22, we've placed so many bets that we've lost count. Whether it was him or me, our betting spirit was always fair. We knew how to accept defeat graciously, and he was well aware of this. Julian ultimately agreed to bet with me. I don't know how he persuaded Wendy. A week later, he returned $20 million. Along with that came a large luxury apartment in the city and a pile of jewelry. The figures matched what the lawyer had found, so I didn't press further. On the day we got the divorce certificate, Julian was uncharacteristically gentle. "Rachel, even though we're divorced, I still consider you family. You can call me if anything comes up." I responded with rare composure, "I don't have the habit of staying entangled with exes, so unless it's life or death, let's not contact each other." Hearing that we'd never contact each other again suddenly left Julian feeling an inexplicable emptiness in his heart. But he quickly suppressed that strange emotion. "I think maybe not this year, after all, we still have a bet to settle." I let out a helpless laugh. "As you wish." Watching him walk away with a light step, I was reminded of the day we got our marriage certificate. He had pulled me along just as joyfully then. "Rachel, I'm really too happy. A wish I've held for over a decade has finally come true. You and I are finally in the same household register. Rachel, we will be happy together from now on, I swear." Looking at the divorce certificate in my hand, I sneered and shook off the image in my mind. I don't believe that a girl in her 20s doesn't love money, only loves a man older than her father. That night, Wendy sent me a message. "Thank you for letting Julian go. Julian told me he left with nothing, and you didn't give him a single cent. What I love is Julian, not his money. You think too little of our relationship. I want to show you that even if he has nothing, I will still live happily with him." I didn't bother to respond to her at all. That very night, I had my assistant call an emergency board meeting. This assistant was newly appointed and answered only to me. The next day, Julian didn't come to the company, and the board meeting proceeded as scheduled. On the third day, after the meeting, I became the company's president. And Julian was appointed as the business department manager. I was reviewing the agreement when the human resources manager knocked and walked in. "President, Julian and Wendy haven't come to the company for a week. What should we do? The company's work is very busy. I spent a week handling everything before I managed to sort it all out. I really haven't paid attention to Julian and Wendy." Busy reading the documents, I asked without looking up, what should be done according to the rules and regulations? Julian and Wendy didn't take leave. According to the rules and regulations, they are considered absent without leave. Absence for 3 days counts as automatic resignation. I looked up, thinking about our bet, and stared seriously at the HR manager. Julian was still the CEO before he left, so he doesn't need to ask for leave. Let it go for him, but Wendy should follow the company policy. Got it, CEO. I'll handle it right away. After the HR manager left, I opened my phone, and Wendy's message arrived right on time. 7 days, Wendy sent me 7 messages. First day, my husband took me on our honeymoon, accompanied by a photo of 2 plane tickets to Sonia. It seems their original plan to go to the Maldives didn't work out. Second day, my husband took me to try the local delicacies. He's really so romantic. The accompanying image is a photo of the interior of a restaurant. You can tell from the decor that it's a small shop. On the third day, my husband bought me a lot of local specialty accessories. They were simply too cute. The accompanying image shows a bracelet, wind chimes, and earrings made from shells, all looking both attractive and affordable. On the fourth day, my husband took me to a popular spot for photos, and it was so crowded. The accompanying image shows a bustling crowd, the kind of clamor Julian detests most. On the 5th day, the scenery here is truly beautiful. My husband is so charming, many beautiful women actively approach him, but he pays them no mind. His eyes are only on me. I'm simply overjoyed with happiness. The accompanying image shows the man's back, facing several women in swimsuits. She is certain it's Julian chatting away happily with them. On the 6th day, my husband is too amazing, I can hardly keep up. The accompanying picture shows a messy bed, clearly not from a 5-star hotel. Today, my husband proposed. I must be the happiest baby in the world. Honey, whether you're rich or poor, I'll always love you. The accompanying picture shows a hand wearing a diamond ring, with the diamond being pitifully small. She flaunts her affection for Julian to me, as if trying to prove that she loves Julian, not the money. I smiled and tossed my phone aside. A few days later, Julian and Wendy stormed into my office. Following closely behind them was the uneasy HR manager. CEO, I discussed the personnel arrangements with Julian, but he refused to believe me and insisted on confirming it with you directly. I nodded at her and said, I understand. You can go back to your work now. Upon hearing this, the HR manager bolted out of the room faster than a rabbit. I looked at Julian. I'm giving you exactly 5 minutes. After that, I have a meeting to attend. With a look of humiliation on his face, Julian asked, Rachel, I've met all your demands. So why have you removed me from my position as CEO? He was furious. He had been the CEO before leaving, but upon his return, he had been demoted to a manager. One position came with an annual salary of $1 million and the freedom to rest at will. The other offered only a little over $100,000 a year, with virtually no time off throughout the entire year. The difference between them was staggering. I frowned, looking at him impatiently. It was a decision made collectively by the board. But you held the board meeting without inviting me. Julian's questioning left me both amused and frustrated. Julian, need I remind you that you weren't even at the company that day? All board members voted in favor. Only you, since you didn't attend, abstained. Julian couldn't believe it. Rachel, do you think I'm a fool? You're the majority shareholder. Who becomes the CEO is just a word from you. I looked at him. There are 3 more minutes. If you don't have anything else to discuss, you can return to your job now. He couldn't possibly think that after the divorce, I would still let him keep control of my company. Julian was so angry that veins bulged on his forehead, teetering on the edge of an outburst. Wendy hurriedly tried to calm him down. Darling, don't be angry. If you damage your health from the anger, I'll feel heartbroken. Since the company has treated you this way, I think we should just quit. We shouldn't have to put up with her attitude here. With your connections, we can easily make a comeback. I still have some money left, and I fully support you in investing it. I'm not like some people, greedy and selfish. Julian was deeply moved. He knew he had made the right choice. Wendy, I just feel so sorry for you, making you suffer along with me. Wendy blushed and buried her head in the man's chest. As long as you love me, I don't feel like I'm suffering. Watching them being so lovey-dovey and intimate right in front of me, I scoffed. The HR department is that way. If you want to resign, you can do so anytime. Take care, I won't see you out. Julian left his job to start his own business. I saw them again at a gathering. The one who organized the gathering was none other than Julian's rival, Henry. When Julian walked in with his arm around Wendy, the gathering fell silent for a moment. Everyone's eyes were on me. Everyone in our circle knew that we had gotten divorced. I don't know what Henry was thinking, inviting me and then inviting Julian. He has someone to accompany him, but I'm alone and feeling quite awkward. It seems a bit beneath my dignity. Seeing Rachel there too, Julian was momentarily taken aback. She seemed different from before. In her tailored professional attire, she exuded the charm of a mature woman. Her light makeup made her look much younger. Wendy saw Julian staring at Rachel and immediately felt a sense of crisis. She whispered softly, "Honey, we're late. Should we make it up somehow?" Julian snapped back to reality, raised his glass toward Henry, who was seated at the head of the table. "Sorry we're late. We'll drink 3 glasses as a penalty." 3 glasses in a row, quite bold. Henry held a cigarette between his lips, the corner of his eye slightly raised, watching Julian finish his drink and loudly cheered. Well, Julian truly knows how to handle things. You flatter me, Henry. Julian gestured for Wendy to sit down. Henry spoke again. Julian, the young lady beside you looks somewhat familiar. You must be bringing your junior out for some experience. Pfft. Someone couldn't hold back and spat out a mouthful of water. It was rather impolite for such an occasion, but no one really cared. Julian's face flushed bright red with embarrassment, but he had no choice but to explain to the crowd, "Henry, this is my fiancée, Wendy." Wendy stood up upon hearing her name. Henry, I've often heard my husband mention you, saying you are a leading figure in the investment world. I'd like to toast to you. Although our company has just been established, its prospects are very promising. I hope you can offer your guidance and support. I'll drink this down, please feel free to drink as you wish. Henry didn't respond to Wendy's words. Instead, he looked at Julian. Oh, Julian, please don't blame me. I was blind and didn't realize the woman by your side is your fiancée. Judging by her age, she must be around the same age as your son, right? Julian, you're truly impressive. I admire you. Henry spoke words of apology, but there was no hint of remorse on his face. Instead, there was a trace of disdain. With that, he no longer paid attention to Julian, laughing and chatting with everyone. Wendy, being ignored, felt so awkward that she didn't know whether to stand or sit. In the end, she sat down, blushing with embarrassment. Everyone there was perceptive and quickly realized that Henry wasn't pleased with Julian. Although no one knew exactly why Henry and Julian were at odds with each other. But one was a major figure in the investment world, while the other was the owner of a small, newly established company. They knew well enough which side to take. If Julian were still the company's president, they would have naturally saved face for him. But he wasn't. Throughout the entire gathering, Julian and Wendy were left on the sidelines. Julian had seen greater challenges and could endure it. But Wendy couldn't. She abruptly stood up, holding a glass of wine, her gaze fixed directly on me. Rachel, I apologize to you. Julian and I truly love each other. Even if you have him leave with nothing, even if you take back all the gifts he gave me. Neither of us blames you at all. It's our fault, and we accept it. In light of him giving you all his assets, could you please spare him? Don't spread rumors about him in our circle and don't let the circle isolate him. After all, you two have known each other for 40 years and have a child together. I believe the child wouldn't want their mother to completely destroy their father. Don't you think? This drink is my apology to you. Whatever faults there are, they're all mine, all because I love him too much. If you're angry, take it out on me. I only beg you not to give my husband any more trouble. With reddened eyes, Wendy looked as though she had suffered an immense injustice, then raised her head and downed the glass of red wine in one go. She stared at me intently, as if she wouldn't sit down until I gave her an answer. Hearing that Julian was leaving with nothing, having given up all his assets, everyone was stunned. Only Henry looked at Julian with a half-smile. I calmly swallowed the food in my mouth and wiped my lips. I calmly looked at Julian and said, Julian, you think so too, don't you? An awkward expression flickered across Julian's face. Instead of answering, he tugged at Wendy's hand and whispered, sit down. I stood up, picked up my wine glass, and walked straight over to Wendy. Everyone thought I would drink this glass of wine. After all, although Julian had wronged me, he had already left with nothing. But I let everyone down. I immediately splashed the wine on the woman's face and grabbed her hair. Under Julian's astonished gaze, I gave Wendy 2 slaps. Wendy said that if I had any temper, I should direct it at her. Indeed, I shouldn't have held back. Julian tried to step forward but was firmly held back by the person next to him. Come on, Julian. It's not good for us men to interfere in matters between women. Unable to break free, Julian could only watch helplessly as I slapped his sweetheart, shouting at me. Rachel, you've gone mad. Where is your upbringing? I gave him a cold look, then slapped Wendy again. You said it yourself, if you've got any anger, take it out on me. True love? Do you know that while love doesn't follow a sequence of arrival, it does follow propriety and moral principles? Anyone with even a little bit of shame would avoid getting involved with someone who has a family. But you eagerly play the homewrecker, tearing families apart. You lack any sense of propriety or shame, yet you dare to come here and provoke me. What's wrong? Have you forgotten how you begged me in the hotel, naked, pleading with me not to hit you? I looked over at Julian again and saw his face flushed red with embarrassment. He ought to be ashamed. After all, infidelity is not exactly a noble moral achievement. Feeling tempted is instinctual, but loyalty is a choice. Not everyone possesses self-discipline or morals. You have no right to criticize me. Wendy trembled in my grip, and I slapped her once more. Did you really think I was made of clay? Then I let go of her. Rachel, you old hag, I'll fight you. Wendy wanted to claw my face, but someone nearby held her back. I gave Henry a grateful look. Without Henry's blatant disgust, these people wouldn't have stood by my side. I vigorously wiped my hands with a wet tissue and then returned to my seat. Wendy, what happens between Julian and me is not for a shameless third party like you to meddle in. He left with nothing, but that's not compensation for me, it's just what I deserve. Wendy didn't expect that Rachel would dare to tear off all pretense in front of these people, even going so far as to hit her. She also didn't anticipate that everyone around would side with Rachel. Her head hurt, and her face stung. She hated Rachel to the core, wishing she could tear her apart on the spot. Hearing Rachel's words, she instinctively retorted. You're talking nonsense. The company was built by Julian from the ground up, and it took him over a decade of hard work to reach this scale. All that money was earned by him. He gave it to you as a form of compensation. But what have you done? Not only are you ungrateful, but because you're jealous of my youth, my beauty, and the fact that Julian loves me, enough to give up everything for me, you spread rumors about him and me in the circle, isolating him from others. He treated you with kindness and loyalty, yet you went for his life. You truly are the most malicious person in the world. With a character like yours, what man would dare to love you? You deserve to be abandoned, to be unloved. You. She wanted Rachel to be utterly disgraced, for the whole world to despise her. She intended to make Rachel kneel at her feet, groveling and begging for mercy like a dog. Enough, Henry said, slamming down his glass. How did such a shrew manage to crash my party? Whoever brought her, make sure she gets out. A middle-aged man quickly stood up. Henry, I had no idea Julian would behave so unreasonably at this age. My mistake, I'll have someone escort her out right away. With that, the middle-aged man looked at Julian. Julian, you're not welcome here. Julian felt utterly humiliated and furious. Clearly, Wendy was the one who had been wronged, yet these people were blindly taking Rachel's side without understanding the situation. When had Rachel gained so much influence? Since the success of his own venture, he had never experienced such humiliation. He would remember this. He put his arm around Wendy and turned to leave, but it was at that moment I spoke up. Julian, maybe it's because you're too busy to remember, but you've forgotten that the startup money for the company originally came from my parents. And as for the investment you're so proud of, it was only after I spent a month persuading Henry that he finally agreed to invest. Julian suddenly turned around, staring at me in disbelief. Rachel, how did you become like this? I admit the startup funds came from your parents. But that investment was something I secured. How can you claim credit for everything? Some people are truly laughable, Henry began. You want to know why I invested in you, even though I looked down on you? Julian held Wendy close, his expression inscrutable. Of course, I saw a profitable opportunity. Julian remembered the toughest year when the company was on the brink of collapse. He presented the proposal he had worked on for several sleepless nights to Henry, hoping he would invest in the company. However, Henry only skimmed through it briefly and said that such trash dared to be brought before him. At that moment, he felt deeply humiliated, yet he had no choice but to bow to reality. He approached other investment companies, but they all turned him down. However, just one day before the company was about to declare bankruptcy, Henry's assistant called him. He said Henry agreed to invest. He had always thought it was because Henry found it profitable. But saying this, could there be more to the story that he wasn't aware of? Your company may have potential, but there are many more promising companies out there. Your return on investment isn't high enough, it doesn't fall within the scope of my investment considerations. It was Rachel, who ignored my cold demeanor and, like an indomitable cockroach, kept standing before me even after repeated rejections. For an entire month, she kept showing up, and I genuinely admired her persistence. To get her to stop pestering me. That's why I invested. I was completely worn down by her persistence. She even begged me at the time not to tell you the truth, afraid it would hurt your self-confidence. Looking back now, I feel she really deserved better. Julian's mind went blank. He had never imagined that the investment he was so proud of had come about this way. He glanced at Rachel with a complicated expression, then looked at the woman sobbing in his arms, suddenly feeling a bit embarrassed. Rachel, I apologize for what happened today. Wendy is young and immature, please don't take it to heart. Julian took Wendy and left, you could even say he ran away. He didn't want to see their mocking faces, didn't want them to think he was just an incompetent fool. He remembered how, after the car accident, his family had gone into debt to pay for his treatment. Back then, he had no money to start his business, was completely broke. It was Rachel's parents who gave all their savings. That's how he got the capital to start his business. The startup capital actually came from Rachel's parents. After he succeeded, he converted all that money into shares and gave them to Rachel. He always felt he didn't owe Rachel anything anymore. But today he found out that the investment that saved the company from bankruptcy was obtained because of Rachel. So, has he really repaid everything he owed Rachel? He had suffered a great blow, feeling as though he had become a joke. What he had taken pride in as his success was actually filled with Rachel's presence everywhere he looked. At this thought, for some reason, an indescribable pain flashed through his heart. Yet mingled with that pain was his own sense of humiliation. Returning to the apartment he rented with Wendy, faced with her weeping and crying, he felt annoyed for the first time. Unusually, he didn't console the sobbing her. Instead, he went to the spare bedroom, tossing and turning for a long time before finally falling into a deep sleep. He had a dream, dreaming of him and Rachel when they were young. The first time he and Rachel made a bet, Rachel held back her tears and handed the lollipop to him, but he couldn't bring himself to eat it at all. The next day, he bought 2 lollipops and gave them back to Rachel. When she was 6, Rachel took the initiative to bet with him, and he saw a hopeful light in her eyes as she looked at his toy gun. He lost, reluctantly handing the toy gun to Rachel. At 7, they weren't in the same class. Every day after school, he would see Rachel chatting and laughing with other little boys. He got angry and made a bet with her, and won. He asked Rachel to do her homework so he wouldn't have as much time to chat and laugh with the little boy. At 8 years old, he felt sorry for Rachel helping him with homework every day. When he lost the bet, he proactively helped Rachel with her homework as a way to repay the debt. At 9, for some reason, Rachel insisted on losing weight and made a bet that she would lose. He brought Rachel breakfast for a whole year, thinking, lose weight? What's the point? Girls are cuter when they have a bit of chub. At 10 years old, Rachel was chatting passionately with another little boy. He won the bet, so he made Rachel do his homework for him and even had her cover for him when he sneaked around to play video games. At 11, Rachel also loved playing his video games. He lost the bet and gave his beloved console to Rachel. That way, he could go to her house to play games with her. In senior year of high school, Rachel said she thought she liked a boy. He got angry and anxious, so he made another bet with Rachel. Rachel, I'll get into the same university as you. If I win, I'll be his girlfriend, not just his little sister. He dreamed of that car accident again, but this time he didn't hold Rachel. Instead, he desperately protected himself. Seeing Rachel lying there covered in blood, he suddenly gasped for air and jolted awake. It took him a long while to calm down, only to realize it was just a dream. The image of Rachel covered in blood from his dream lingered in his mind, refusing to fade away. He raised his hand to touch his eyes, feeling the damp warmth on his skin. For some reason, he suddenly wanted to go see Rachel, to check if she was really okay. He got up, walked out of the bedroom, and headed straight for the door. Just as his hand touched the doorknob, Wendy's sobbing voice came from behind him. "Honey, where are you going?" I've been so wrong today, and you're not even comforting me. Do you dislike me now? Julian hadn't figured out how to respond when Wendy's soft body embraced him from behind. Honey, I don't mind Rachel hitting or scolding me, but how could she treat you like this? You've already left with nothing, so why would she team up with those people to target you? How can she be so awful? In the past, he wouldn't have thought anything was wrong when Wendy spoke about Rachel this way. But today, for some unknown reason, he suddenly felt a bit agitated. Nevertheless, he still patiently comforted her. We were the ones who wronged her first. I accept whatever she does to me. In the future, let's try to avoid her as much as possible. Wendy was taken aback by Julian's words. Suddenly, she felt a pang of anxiety. Since returning from the drinking party, Julian's state seemed off. In the past, when she talked about Rachel like this, he wouldn't chime in, but he would never say such things either. All right, hubby, I won't say any more. From now on, we'll just steer clear of her. As long as we hang on for a few more months, your bet with Rachel expires, and I. Upon hearing the word bet, Julian suddenly lost his temper. I told you, you don't know about the bet. You know nothing at all. Wendy had never seen Julian so furious since she first met him, and she suddenly felt a bit scared. All right, dear, I won't say anything more. I don't know anything about the bet. It's getting late, and I'm really scared. Can we please go back and rest? In the end, Julian didn't manage to go out, eventually coaxing Wendy back to their room. After the drinking gathering ended, I intentionally stayed behind to thank Henry. Henry, thank you for today. Henry dismissed it with a wave. We're partners, and I have an investment in your company. If I didn't help you, who else would I help? I just never imagined that two people who loved each other so deeply could end up going their separate ways. No wonder I never liked him much. The real issue was here all along. After this drinking party, I don't think anyone will be willing to invest in Julian anymore. It's unlikely he'll make a comeback. Do you feel sorry for him? I smiled. Henry, you must be joking. Haven't you heard? A good ex should be like their dead. Henry looked at me with satisfaction. I wasn't wrong about you. If you forgive everything, then you deserve everything you've gone through. Thankfully, you haven't disappointed me. Rachel, you must work hard. I nodded. Don't worry, Henry. Henry left without any delay. After all these years, he still remembered the young girl who had followed him for a month back then. After seeing Henry off, my chauffeur arrived to pick me up. I don't dwell on why Henry is so kind to me. All that matters is knowing he's on my side. I understand the principle of staying clear-minded when it's necessary and turning a blind eye when appropriate. After that, I never saw Julian again, but people in the circle still talked about him from time to time. As Henry said, Julian indeed failed to secure any more investments, and his company couldn't sustain itself, eventually dissolving. Most of the money Wendy had previously received from Julian was recovered by me. Since the company could no longer operate, the remaining funds were all lost. Julian had no choice but to go out and work, once a CEO reduced to an ordinary employee. It's easy to imagine how significant the psychological blow was for him. When one's emotions are in turmoil, life just doesn't flow as smoothly. A year later, I didn't wait for Julian. Instead, I waited for Wendy. She looked at me triumphantly. Rachel, Julian said you made a bet before the divorce. Holding a brand new marriage certificate, she added, isn't it time for you to honor your bet now? I looked at her disdainfully. What bet? I don't remember any bet. Wendy widened her eyes in disbelief. Rachel, you're being shameless. Wendy, if you have nothing better to do, don't cause a scene here. Don't you know gambling is illegal? I'm a law-abiding citizen. Wendy wanted to throw a tantrum, but the security guards who rushed and dragged her out. When I got off work in the evening, I saw Julian again. In the underground parking lot, he was standing in front of my car. His wrinkled clothes looked very cheap. Compared to the custom-made outfits that used to cost six figures, he really seemed down on his luck. As soon as he saw me, he rushed over. Rachel, you're not honoring the bet. I smiled as I looked at him. Julian, it was you who broke the bet first. Julian avoided eye contact. I didn't. Wendy truly loves me, that's why she stays with me even through the toughest times. I took out my phone and played a recording. The background noise was overwhelming. But Wendy's voice was highly distinctive. Julian recognized it the moment he heard it. That bitch Julian was actually forced out of the house by that old hag Rachel, leaving him with nothing. But he said he made a bet with the old hag, betting that I would stand by him no matter what. If he wins, he can get more assets. I don't even know if I can trust him. That old hag, how could she possibly keep her promise? I told Julian that the old hag was playing him, but he said she takes her word very seriously and would never go back on what she promised. I have to put on this act with him for another year. Kevin, having an old man sleeping next to me, it makes me sick. He's older, and he's terrible in bed, yet he's so full of himself, thinking he's amazing. If it weren't for his money, I wouldn't be able to stand it anymore. You really need to comfort me. The recording stops there. I look at Julian, seeing the shock and pain in his eyes, and say, Julian, you've lost, completely and utterly. Julian's eyes were red, his fists clenched, he had lost, and had lost long ago. He lost from the day he got divorced. That day, he returned to Wendy's place with the divorce papers. After telling her about leaving his marriage with nothing, Wendy's attitude changed. She had a huge argument with him and was ready to leave. He was afraid that he might truly end up with nothing. Even knowing Wendy was only after his money, he couldn't let go now. He revealed the bet he had made with Rachel. Wendy didn't believe it, but after he swore an oath, she stayed. He couldn't lose. If he lost, he would truly have nothing left. No, I didn't lose. Your recording is fake. You're lying to me. Looking at his pained expression, I should have felt satisfaction, but all I felt was bitterness. Julian, stop lying to yourself. Deep down, you know the recording is real. Actually, from the moment you made that bet with me, you knew I wouldn't keep my promise no matter the outcome, didn't you? You were in such a hurry to divorce me, afraid I would ruin your reputation, afraid I'd speak ill of you in front of our son, afraid I'd tell your parents about this. You were desperate to get rid of me, to calm my anger. You think that with your $1 million annual salary, there's no problem supporting your true love. So you agreed to my conditions. As for that bet, if I can make it happen, that's ideal. But if I can't, you probably just wanted it to be a way to control me, right? You wanted to use this to control me, to persuade our son for you. You wanted to use this to control me, to smooth things over with your parents. After all, if your parents found out they raised such an ungrateful, heartless son who abandoned his wife and child, they'd probably be devastated, right? You just didn't expect that the board would strip you of your presidency. Even less did you anticipate that your new venture would fail again. Julian, a bet is a bet. Just like when we were young. Julian left, looking utterly devastated as he went. Some time later, Julian's parents appeared at my doorstep. They were carrying bags large and small, and upon seeing me, immediately came forward. Rachel, you're finally back. Hungry, aren't you? Hurry up and open the door, Mom will make you something to eat. Mom, Dad, why didn't you call me before coming over? I could have picked you up, then you wouldn't have had to wait outside for so long. I opened the door and quickly ushered the two elders inside. Oh, it's just that your father said you're both busy and we shouldn't disturb you. We're fine waiting here, we can just enjoy the sun for a while. My mother-in-law and father-in-law took all the big and small bags to the kitchen. When they came out, my mother-in-law asked me, "Where's Julian? Why didn't he come back with you?" I replied awkwardly, "He's still working overtime. I'll give him a call. This kid is still pushing himself so hard." Rachel, you really need to talk some sense into him during normal times, he's always listened to you since he was little. You've worked all day, you should rest for a while. I'll start cooking right now. My mother-in-law nudged me upstairs before hurriedly heading into the kitchen. My father-in-law and mother-in-law have a great relationship, so he followed her into the kitchen after she went in. After wrestling with myself for a long time, I finally dialed Julian's number. The phone rang for quite a while before he answered. Hey, I had something to deal with just now. I didn't mean to ignore your call, Rachel. What's up? My parents are here, at my place. I think you should come over and explain things to them. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, then, okay, I'll head over right now. Hanging up the phone, I was also thinking about how to persuade the elderly couple. They've watched me grow up and treated me no worse than Julian, especially after our parents passed away. They loved me even more, surpassing Julian. My divorce from Julian is a matter between the two of us. I don't want them to suffer any harm. Julian arrived quickly, pulling up in about 20 minutes. It was my father-in-law who opened the door, and upon seeing his son at the doorstep, he was taken aback. You silly boy, have you hit your head? Ringing the doorbell when you come back to your own home. When I came downstairs, I saw this scene. Get in here quickly. You keep working overtime every day, leaving Rachel alone at home. She must be so lonely. How are you as a husband? Julian lowered his head as he walked in, listening to his father-in-law scolding, and said quietly, I'll try not to work overtime from now on and spend more time with Rachel. My father-in-law nodded, that's more like it. Seeing me, my father-in-law smiled and called out, Rachel, come on down. Dinner is about ready. Julian also looked up at me, his eyes filled with evasion and shame. Once the food was on the table, my father-in-law suggested making a video call to his son overseas. Since everyone is here, let's give Liam a video call. It's morning over there, so it won't disturb his sleep. Liam will be thrilled to see us. Soon, Liam's face, strikingly similar to Julian's, appeared on the screen. Grandpa, are you at home? I see the home decor behind you. Liam excitedly began. Yes, good grandson, I'm at home, come and see, your grandma, mom, and... The doorbell rang at that moment, and Julian immediately stood up, only to be pressed back down by her mother-in-law. You've had a tiring day, you rest, I'll get it. The door opened, and I saw Wendy's face. Julian, you bastard, you haven't gotten a divorce, and you're running off to your ex-wife's house to eat. Do you have no shame? Playing both sides at once. With that, Wendy barged in and, without another word, flipped over all the food on the dining table. If you won't divorce me, I'll make sure your life isn't easy. Just as the food was knocked over, Julian grabbed Wendy and dragged her desperately towards the door. Let go of me, you bastard, you old man, who has no ability. No money, and still clinging to me, refusing to divorce, I really must have been blind. Let go of me. Julian opened the door, flung Wendy outside, and then walked out as well. But their voices arguing still reached the room. You were the one who said you loved me for who I am, not for my money. I left my wife and children for you, gave up everything for you, and now you want a divorce? Forget it. Wendy scrambled up from the floor, desperately clawing at Julian. You're talking nonsense. You clearly know that I only love your money. If not, you wouldn't have lied about making a bet with Rachel just to keep me. I wouldn't have been deceived by you and actually registered the marriage with you. Even if I tricked you into marriage, weren't you also willingly deceived by me? If you want to remarry, wait until I die. The sounds of the argument outside the door gradually faded away. Grandpa, what's wrong with you? My son's anxious voice came through the phone, and only then did I notice that my father-in-law was clutching his chest, teetering on the verge of collapse. I immediately dialed 120 and also called Julian. Although we rushed the elderly man to the hospital as quickly as possible, he suffered a sudden heart attack and ultimately could not be saved. Upon learning of his grandfather's passing, my son hurriedly returned to the country. Seeing me, his eyes reddened, and he tightly embraced me in his arms. Mom, I'm back late. I patted his broad back. No, you're back just in time. You know, Mom is a strong person. During the period of handling the funeral arrangements, neither my mother-in-law nor my son spoke a single word to Julian. Before my mother-in-law returned to her hometown, she took my hand as she was about to leave. "Rachel, I feel so sorry for you. If I had known, I would have never agreed to your marriage with him in the first place. Maybe it's for the best to divorce. You have to live a good life." With reddened eyes, I said, "Mom, please don't go back to your hometown. Stay and live with me." My mother-in-law waved her hand and said, "I have to take your father back to our hometown. I also need to visit your parents' graves and seek forgiveness on his behalf." When my son was leaving, I went to see him off. He smiled and said, "Mom, I'll be back in a year after finishing my studies. I'll be your support from then on." I was so moved that tears welled up in my eyes. "Yes, Mom, I'll wait for you to become my support. Ever since father passed away, mother hates him, and son ignores him. Julian feels like he's just a walking corpse. He gets himself drunk every single day. He keeps asking himself, how could it have come to this? Why on earth did he become so bewitched and divorce Rachel? If I had gone home that time and explained to Rachel. If I had gone home and told Rachel that he wouldn't divorce her. If I had gone home and asked for Rachel's forgiveness. Would everything have turned out differently? Wendy kept demanding a divorce, but Julian just wouldn't agree. She wasn't willing, as a woman in her 20s, to be with a man in his 40s. It pained her. Seeing Julian drinking heavily every day, she couldn't help but make a few sarcastic remarks. "What's the use of regretting it now? If you could have controlled that little thing between your legs back then, you wouldn't have ended up with your family broken and scattered. You even drove your own father to his grave. What a filial son you are. Do you really think a woman in her 20s would be interested in an old man the same age as her father? Are you dreaming? Is it the stale old man smell on you that's attractive, or your sagging skin that's appealing? Stay here and reflect. I'm going to find some young men for a little refreshment. If you don't divorce, I'll make sure you wear a green hat that flies all over the sky." I saw Julian again at the detention center. The warden told me that Julian and his wife had gotten into an argument. In the heat of the moment, he pushed her down the stairs. Although he called 120 afterwards, his wife hit her head and didn't make it. Julian was sentenced to 10 years in prison for intentional assault. It's really something. Some people spend 40 years without learning love and responsibility. They pay a lifetime of price for greed and hypocrisy. He and I looked at each other across the table. He had aged a lot, in his 40s but looking like 60. His eyes reddened, and trembling, he pulled a handkerchief from his pocket. He slowly unfolded it, revealing 2 silver rings marked by the passage of time. "Julian has never done anything he regrets. Divorcing you is the only regret of my life." He placed the handkerchief in the middle of the table, his voice hoarse. 10 years, this might just be my karma. Please give these 2 rings to our son. Tell him they're from me. If he ever meets a girl he likes, he can give them to her as tokens of affection. Also, let him know I wasn't a good person. Tell him not to follow in my footsteps." I didn't touch the 2 rings, just looked at him calmly. "Our son has more integrity than you ever did. I believe he won't turn out like you. Keep these 2 pieces of junk to yourself. I have money, and I won't let the woman my son likes wear such cheap things." I stood up and turned around just as I reached the door. "Julian, the bet I wanted to make at that time was that if you lost, you would never appear in front of me again." In his desperate gaze, I turned and walked away. As soon as my son completed his studies and returned, I immediately brought him into the company. When he was ready to take charge on his own, I decisively stepped back. While I'm still not too old, I want to seize the opportunity to explore the magnificent landscapes of our country. My son was very supportive and even took the initiative to research travel guides for me. I planned a 3-year nationwide tour. Just before setting off, my son asked me, "Mom, why did you transfer 2% of the company shares to Dad?" I looked at my son and the striking resemblance in his eyes and brows. "No matter what, we've known each other for over 40 years. He once protected me too, and besides, he's your father. We can't let him live too miserably after he gets out of prison, that would be too embarrassing for both of us. When you have time, keep an eye on things over there. After all, he's your dad. My son smiled at me. Mom, don't worry. The officer told me my dad's been behaving well in there. While you're out traveling, remember to contact me every day, or I'll worry. I smiled and waved at him. All right, Mom knows. You're starting to sound more like a fussy old woman than I am. Hurry back now. Being a CEO isn't as easy as it seems. Watching my son walk away, I rushed to the boarding gate, ready to embrace the vast beauty of the world. On the day my 3-year journey across China ended, I stood before the Potala Palace in Lhasa. The sunlight was glaring, yet it warmed me so deeply it nearly brought tears to my eyes. My son Liam flew over personally to pick me up. Now the chairman of the group's board of directors, he was dressed sharply in a suit, his eyes reflecting both steadiness and an edge of ambition. Outside the airport sat a brand new Maybach. He smiled as he opened the door for me. Mom, let's go. We're heading home. I teased him on purpose. Home? Your mother's gotten so used to wandering that she might not be comfortable in a mansion anymore. He held my hand, his voice low but firm. Then I'll buy you 10 more houses, anywhere in the world, take your pick. Anyway, the company's earnings are endless. Yes, the company has grown frighteningly fast over these past few years. From the top tier domestically, it has shot directly into the Fortune 500. Liam's capabilities far exceed what Julian had back in the day. Without relying on anyone, he and his team alone have multiplied the foundation I left behind tenfold. As for Julian, the day he was released from prison, I didn't go to pick him up, nor did I send anyone to do so. I just had the lawyer deliver a document. I bought back that 2% of shares. Now, he really has nothing left. According to the prison guard who later told me privately, Julian was suffering a living hell in prison. When he went in, he wasn't even 50, when he was released, his hair was completely white, hunched over when he walked, looking like a man in his 70s. The people in prison knew he was in for murdering his mistress and heard it was all about money, abandoning his wife and children. Everyone looked at him like he was trash. Over 10 years, he was beaten, insulted, and forced to do the dirtiest and hardest labor. He once tried to show off a love that once was to his cellmates using those 2 cheap silver rings, but ended up having the rings snatched away and taking a good beating himself. On the day he was released from prison, he carried a plastic bag containing only a few old clothes and a moldy diary. Standing at the prison gates, he made one last call to Liam. Liam put it on speakerphone right in front of me. Liam, your dad's out of prison now. Can you come see your dad? The voice on the other end of the line sounded as old as a rusted bellows, hoarse, trembling, and filled with a pitiful attempt to please. Liam didn't hesitate for a moment, his tone icy as he spoke. I don't have a father. All I have is an ex-convict who abandoned his wife and child, drove his grandfather to his grave, and killed for a mistress. You'd better not show yourself in front of me or my mother again, or I won't hesitate to have my lawyer send you back inside. This time it'll be for economic crimes, enough to put you away for life. With that, he hung up the phone. Later, Julian moved to a small town in his hometown, where he rented a damp basement apartment. He scraped by each day by collecting recyclables and relying on the minimum living allowance. Everyone in the town knew his story, and they would point at him, calling him the wife-abandoning murderer. He was too ashamed to walk with his head held high, and he dared not contact anyone. Damn it, my ex-mother-in-law, staying by my father-in-law's grave in her hometown, lived to be over 90 years old. Before she passed away, she called Julian to her bedside and said only one sentence, "Rachel is my real daughter. In this lifetime, you are unworthy of being my son." Julian knelt by the bed, crying like a dog, but my mother-in-law didn't even glance at him before closing her eyes for the last time. As for Wendy, her ashes were hastily buried by her parents back in their hometown, without even a tombstone erected. I heard her mother went crazy later on, shouting in the streets every day, "How could my daughter have fallen for that old thing? He ruined her whole life." And what about me? After returning from the trip, I didn't rush to retire. I started my own charitable foundation, specifically to help women harmed by domestic violence and infidelity. The first donation to the foundation was $100 million from my personal account. At the opening ceremony, media swarmed in, with headlines blazing with passion. 42-year-old divorced female CEO, after revenge, turned around with $100 million, fulfilling all the wronged women of the world. That day, I wore a bright red gown, standing on the stage, smiling with boldness and brilliance. The host asked me, "Rachel, what is your biggest wish right now?" I looked at the flashing lights in the audience and spoke softly, yet silenced the entire room. "My wish is to let every woman who's been betrayed like me know, you deserve better. You can personally trample scumbags into the mud, then walk in high heels toward a broader world. And as for those scumbags, I hope they remember for the rest of their lives, what they personally destroyed was the only person who ever truly loved them." After the event ended, Liam handed me a bouquet of roses. "Mom, let me introduce someone to you." I raised an eyebrow and saw a man 5 years younger than me standing not far away, dressed in a suit and looking gentle and poised. He was Liam's university mentor, now the youngest academician at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. He divorced early, has no children, and possesses a calm demeanor with gentle eyes. Liam said with a sly smile and a low voice, "He's been chasing you for 3 years. If you don't give in soon, he'll be utterly despaired." I watched the man approach me, offering a diamond ring, not a cheap silver band, but a dazzling 5-carat pink diamond that shone brightly. I smiled, extended my hand, and let him slip it onto my finger. At that moment, I suddenly remembered the young Julian who had once put a simple silver ring on my finger just like this. But now, I finally understand, true love isn't about letting you suffer for 20 years, only to be kicked aside in the end. Instead, it's about having someone come to you, carrying light, even in the age when you should be in full bloom, and saying, "Good night, Rachel. This time, I'm here to protect you. I've seen the vast beauty of the world, and the scumbag has been completely shattered. From now on, I'm starting a new life." And as for Julian, let him rot slowly in that damp basement, clutching his moldy diary. After all, some people never learn love or responsibility in 40 years. They should spend the rest of their lives paying it back. 5 years later, I stood on the beach of my private island, the sea breeze carrying a salty scent as it gently brushed through my long hair. At 50 years old, I am called the ageless goddess by the media. Every day I do yoga, scuba diving, and enjoy fine wine, with skin so firm it's like I'm in my 30s. My son Liam teases me, "Mom, with how you're doing, you could even have another one." I glare at him with a smile, "Nonsense, I'm enjoying myself now." Liam is now a rising star in the business world, with his group's market value surpassing $1 trillion. He married a gentle and virtuous daughter-in-law, a PhD, whose personality resembles my younger self, smart, independent, with a sparkle in her eyes. Last year, they gave me a pair of twin grandchildren, a boy and a girl. Right now, the 2 little ones are running barefoot on the beach chasing fiddler crabs, their laughter crisp as bells. My husband, the Chinese Academy of Sciences academician, Harrington, embraced me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about again? You're smiling so sweetly." I turned to kiss him and said, "Remember how awkwardly you pursued me when we first met in Lhasa?" He chuckled softly and replied, "That was the best decision I've ever made in my life." We officially got together after returning from that trip. He has traveled with me across all 7 continents and the 4 oceans, from the Aurora to the Sahara, from the Amazon to Antarctica. He proposed to me under the Eiffel Tower in Paris, and we held our wedding in a water villa in the Maldives, surrounded only by our closest family and friends. It was simple, yet so romantic it brought tears to my eyes. After marriage, we weren't in a hurry to have children, instead, we first enjoyed our time as a couple. Later, I mentioned wanting to hear the sound of a baby crying again, and he smiled and said, "Whatever you say." So, through assisted reproductive technology, we had a little daughter. Now she's 3 years old, fair and delicate like a little princess, constantly clinging to her older siblings to play. the foundation's endeavors have grown ever larger. From helping women who have suffered domestic violence and infidelity, to funding girls' education and women's entrepreneurship, it now reaches across the globe, impacting millions of women. Last year, I was selected as one of the top 10 world's most influential women, and the United Nations invited me to give a speech. On stage that day, wearing my favorite red cheongsam, I looked out at women from all over the world seated below. Among them were those who had been hurt by scumbag men, and others like me who had turned their lives around against the odds. I only said one thing. Happiness is not something given to you by others, it's something you seize for yourself. After the show, a young girl rushed up, hugged me, and cried, "Rachel, thank you for making me believe that I can be just as happy as you." In that moment, I suddenly realized that the thing I'm most proud of in my life isn't crushing scumbags into the mud, it's helping so many sisters, empowering them to live as queens in their own right. As for Julian, after he was released from prison, I wanted to make him disappear completely. But Liam said, "Mom, let him live. Seeing you happy will be his greatest punishment." So Julian spent his entire life collecting scrap in a small town back in his hometown. His hair turned white, his back became hunched, and his eyes grew dull. The kids in the town mocked him, "Look, it's that old beggar who abandoned his wife and killed someone." Before his mother passed away, she left all her savings and the house to me, saying, "Rachel, these were always meant to be yours." Julian knelt by the bedside, his voice hoarse from crying, but his former mother-in-law only said, "You don't deserve it." Later, he developed terminal cancer. He lay on a bench in the public hospital's hallway, with no money for surgery and no one to care for him. Before he died, he asked a nurse to call me. I picked it up and put it on speakerphone. The whole family was grilling on the island, Harrington was barbecuing seafood, our youngest daughter was singing, and the grandchildren were laughing and playing. On the other end of the line, his voice was as weak as a flickering candle in the wind, "Rachel, I was wrong. The person I've hurt the most in my life is you. Could I just hear your voice one more time?" I glanced at the happiness surrounding me and spoke with a smile. "Julian, do you hear it? This is my home, my children, my laughter. This is the happiness you personally destroyed but can never have again. Good night. Don't call anymore." After saying that, I hung up the phone, turned to hug my husband, and continued laughing with the children. The waves crashed to shore, fireworks soared into the sky. The stars that night were especially bright. I, Rachel, have suffered hardship, shed tears, been betrayed, and also sought revenge in this life. But in the end, I won the most complete happiness, a peak in my career, a house full of children and grandchildren, a beloved partner by my side, and countless sisters. As for those who once hurt me, they can only watch from afar, filled with regret for a lifetime. I've journeyed through the great mountains and rivers, and the scumbag is utterly shattered. Now, I just want to say, women, always remember, you deserve the very best happiness. And I already have it.